Hello, everybody. This is Eric Roovers. Welcome to Software AG, the Software AG webcast titled "From Mandatory Project to Must-Have Program." My name is Eric Roovers. I am responsible for Software AG's portfolio of transformation, optimization, and control solutions in the EMEA region. I will be presenting together with Ed Tucker, who is CIO at our the Chief Information Security Officer of the year 2017. As we move through today's presentation, I invite you to submit any questions that you may have via the Q&A box, which is located in the top right corner of your current webcast dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of today's program. In the event that we are not able to answer your question, your submission will be recorded and we will be back in touch with you as soon as possible. Today's presentation is being recorded. The program recording will be made available to you. Now, in some countries, the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is basically just an evolution to existing strong legislation, whereas in other countries, it still has yet to be done for the GDPR to become effective as of late May. Numerous non-EU countries have legislation very similar to GDPR or are planning to introduce such legislation. And many organizations have used the last few months to implement the compliance measures mandated by the GDPR. But the discussion is not just about complying with regulatory requirements. As the ongoing Facebook debacle shows us, it is about retaining your customers' trust, that you will safeguard the data that they entrust you with. And it is about the dire consequences if you betray that trust. So today we will talk about how to see beyond the GDPR deadline of May 2018. And we will look at how you can build a data protection practice into the very DNA of your organization. So it's now my pleasure to welcome Ed Tucker, CIO of DP Governance and European Chief Information Security Officer of the Year. Please, Ed, go ahead.
Thank you, Eric, and hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Ed Tucker, the CIO of a UK startup called DP Governance. The DP standing for Data Protection, essentially an organization that looks at data protection in its fullest form, not as a regulatory tick box or a straight regulatory requirements, but the need to protect data that is of value to an organization. We'll take you through a tour of what data protection is all about, and of course GDPR is a big hook at the moment and fresh on everyone's lips, especially with May looming around the corner. We'll talk you through more of what it's really about. So we titled it Developing a Sustainable Approach to Data Protection, and that's exactly what the GDPR is about. It's about sustainable data protection, not a one-off assessment, but continuous and sustainable. So data itself, data is effectively the new currency. Data is the lifeblood of an organization. Those who make the best, efficient and effective use of data are those who are going to thrive in the new corporate world. Data is there to be maximized, to create revenue, but at the same time it has value to the organization and as such should be protected. Personal data especially. And we now have regulatory requirements with some real teeth that are there to ensure that we look after the data belonging to our customers and our employees. This data is important. We can have a material impact on the rights and freedoms, as the GDPR said, on causing risk to the data subjects themselves. There are complex data protection regulations across different legal jurisdictions. We have the GDPR. We will have local derogations that mean different things. So the age limit for child data will be different between different countries. But the GDPR isn't the only data protection regulation, nor is it the first by any stretch. What also goes with the rise of that is legal cases, not just the regulators, not just the fines, the 4% that everyone hangs their hat on to try and make you afraid. About the victims of lost data, those who have had a material impact upon them. Shareholders, customers, employees, they all seek assurances from the boards and from the corporations that data protection risk is truly understood and is taken seriously. We expect organizations to look after our data. It should be transparent to us, but we expect a certain benchmark from organizations that realistically we don't see today. But it's not just the fear of fines that drives us here. That should never be a driving force for protecting valuable assets. There's of course the brand erosion. The share price impact itself can be huge. The customer loss. Customers can vote with their feet. Yes, not everyone is going to leave Facebook because there isn't a suitable alternative. Not everyone left eBay because there wasn't a suitable alternative. Most organizations are not in that luxurious position. We cannot afford to lose customers through our own misuse and lack of protection of data. GDPR is a significant rewrite. It's not a huge step from many of the existing data protection laws, but there are some key aspects that really drive it out. The concept of accountability, that it's no use now saying that we take data protection seriously. You must be able to demonstrate it. You must be able to evidence it. You must be able to show that you have technical and organizational measures and they are actually effective. We now, of course, have mandatory breach notifications and the windows with them in. There is a certain amount of leeway within there, of course there is, because when do you truly become aware of an incident? And even at the start of an incident, any kind of personal data breach, will you have all of the facts to hand at that point? Unlikely. The adoption of privacy by design. We've talked for many years in the information security industry about designing security in from the outset. This really brings that home. The security of the personal data that we process on behalf of the data subject. It is true that most people are selling on the fear of the fines from the regulation. I don't believe the regulators are the spectre in the room. Lawyers are. The litigations that we will see off the back of personal data breaches. The biggest spectre in the room is arguably ourselves and the practices we've undertaken for years. So what is data protection? There's a commonly held belief that it's an information security problem, or it's an IT problem, or it's a technical problem. It isn't. The cyber, of course, is one aspect, and it's one that gets all the big news. But data protection is about understanding how a business operates. All of the business processes which work together to potentially create risk, to provide ourselves with a business intelligence service. The best position is built up from many processes that work together throughout the business, each of which adds a value. It adds a value to building in organizational mechanisms that treat risk and protect data properly. The best way of preventing a data breach is to stop the vulnerability, and I don't mean a technical vulnerability here. I mean a weakness in how the business operates. The key to that is through people, process, and procedures. How do you go about it? Well, it needs a structured approach. It's not just about mapping to a regulation. A structured approach means you need to analyze how a business operates, the performance therein, the areas it works in, the sectors, the nature of the data it works with, the business processes that interact with that data, the technology stack, how all of that comes together with regards to the protection of data. It's about empowering the business themselves to develop a framework that shows how they can develop from a current position into measurable improvements, demonstrable and repeatable improvements in all areas of data protection. Most organizations are going through the inevitable transformation. We used to call it business change, and now we call it digital transformation. If we embed that framework throughout that transformation, we can use our own transformation activities to build resilience in data protection, to build information assurance in from the start, not to retrofit it after the event. All of this is built around improving decision making, making spending habits more clear, bringing clarity to resource planning, and identifying the real requirements, whether that's for training or to engage with external resources for a narrow problem scopes that actually helps us move forward. So what is required? A comprehensive approach to data protection. That's not lip service ticks in boxes. It's not an audit that we have to pass. A comprehensive approach to data protection requires us to look truly at ourselves. And as I say, how we operate as a business, it's not just the technology. It's not simply the processing activity in its own right. There are many interdependencies between business processes that will affect that processing activity, that will potentially draw weaknesses or vulnerabilities and ultimately lead to risks within that processing activity and to the data itself. The GDPR tells us that we must demonstrate that we have a data protection framework in place. Simply focusing on compliance and mapping directly to the law does a certain amount, but it is only one aspect of data protection. There are many organizations who have been compliant with many regulations and standards who have still suffered significant breaches as a result, because they have focused solely on compliance, not on data protection. Breaches will still happen. You can never set personal data breaches or any kind of incident to a zero occurrence. It cannot be done. There is always a risk that a breach will happen. Is it about ensuring that you have robust policies and procedures to mitigate actual risk and to document your decisions? And when I say mitigate actual risk, this isn't a one-time theoretical risk assessment. This is understanding the various parameters that actually make up risk and applying suitable mitigations to the root cause, not the symptoms. Too often in data protection and information security, we treat symptoms. We put sticking plasters on issues to make them go away, because that's how the risk perceives to realize itself. We never really dig down and understand that root cause. We have to treat risk management to its truest form as a true cycle. And of course, how do you manage risk unless you understand what risk you have to start with? The board themselves need what's called a defensible position. A defensible position is understanding where I am today and showing demonstrable improvements against it. It is going to be very difficult for every organization to be fully compliant with the GDPR by May the 25th. Some organizations will never be fully compliant because they have conflicting regulations and will need to cite one regulation against another to demonstrate why they cannot be compliant with particular aspects. The key ingredients in all of this is in that risk identification, building in the prevention mechanisms, measurement and the return of investment and the effectiveness of those controls, and of course reporting. We need to build an understanding of business process, data and technology, and how they interrelate with each other. There is not a breach ever that has been as a result of a single failing. There has never been a breach that has been down to a single technological failing or a single people failing. It is not simply a case that you didn't patch a server. Think about what's in front of that server, the network itself, how the network operates, the firewalls and the rules on them which determine how effective they are, the access controls to the asset itself, the monitoring in place to understand what normal behavior looks like, the process and procedures for those who interact with the assets, and the potential threats that may come from a myriad of places. The industry is predicated on selling you fear, being afraid of super sophisticated hackers, nation-state threats, zero-day exploits, things you can't defend against unless you buy the latest technology. You cannot buy data protection. You cannot buy security. The best security products in the world are only as good as the business processes that allow them to work effectively. Firewalls are only as good as their rule sets. The rule sets are determined by business process and business change, and identifying the potential risk of making those change, and a process that reviews the rules on the firewalls, and understanding in different areas of the organization there needs to be different rules. Understanding where the entry and exit points are. Understanding the makeup and the complexity and the logical design of the architecture. Are we placing data at risk? Are we placing data too near the internet? Are we leaving access to data uncontrolled? Do we know who needs access to the data and for what business purpose, and ensuring that it's at least privileged access? Do we make our users aware of how they need to operate and their responsibilities? Do we understand that a policy is only effective if the customers of that policy, A, read it, B, understand it, and C, adhere to it? Because if it doesn't match any of those, then it is a weakness. Just having a policy is not good enough. Just having a firewall is not good enough. Too many times we look at controls like encryption and think that it solves all our ills. It's okay because our data is encrypted. The problem is that data needs to be accessible. Data needs to be accessible for those who need to access it and those who need to use it as part of their business operation. That could be people and that can be assets, that can be systems, that can be services. They all have legitimate access to the data, which means when they ask questions of the data, they are given answers back, not in encrypted form, in a way that they can use it. Of course, any one of those assets can be malicious. They can be compromised by external threats. It can be a malicious insider. It can be an accidental insider. It's recognizing that where we implement a control, such as encryption, what risks or what threats it seeks to mitigate and what it doesn't. So we understand actually how effective our controls are when it comes to particular threats or particular scenarios. The market will continue to tell you that there are so many threats that you cannot defend against. They will tell you it's a matter of when and not if. They will tell you about super sophisticated attackers. Of course they will, because that will make you buy products. Your biggest weakness is actually yourself. There is a reason why insider threat is always the highest threat within information security. And most of the time that isn't a malicious insider. But it's very difficult to build a program of change. Most of these things are the things we should have been doing for years and years. This is about a business-focused approach. This is about building out an understanding of the data, the value, how it's accessed, how it is processed, the interdependencies between assets, and understanding the true risks to all of those assets and the knock-on effect. And only then can we start to build an ecosystem that seeks to protect those assets. The key, as always, is to create an as-is position. Where am I today? That's not always an overnight job or a 2-minute job. It's about building that understanding. Understanding where we are strong and understanding where we have weaknesses across the business. Interrogating the full gambit of data protection. Where we are strong, we should make sure that they are repeatable and consistent patterns that we use in everything we do. And where we have weaknesses, we need to make sure that not only do we mitigate those weaknesses where it's appropriate, so let's face it, some weaknesses are those you will accept. But where we look to change, we design those weaknesses out. We use our as-is position, we use our risk management approach to design out the flaws as we develop our next change, our next process, our next technology development. This is about placing data protection at the very heart of the business. To secure the crown jewels, what are the crown jewels? It's the most valuable assets to the organization. And that starts with the data. But the data on its own has no value. It is how we use the data that drives value. Of course, by using the data, we introduce risk. Understanding how we use the data, how we drive processes to maximize the effectiveness of that data and the value of that data, the best customer service we can drive, the latest innovative products, helps us to understand how as a business we operate and how we potentially put those assets at risk. This isn't about developing a one-off assessment, the classic risk assessment. The classic risk assessment is a point-in-time view. Almost by the time it is written, it is out of date. Because businesses are continually evolving, businesses continually change. There's a reason why we have disciplines like change management, because it recognizes that we're in a constant flux, we're in a constant change. We continually seek to improve, we continually seek to do things better. We seek to improve our technology, our processes, our efficiency, our people. A one-off assessment doesn't truly understand what the risks of all of those parameters are. We have to continually assess, we have to continually review, we have to embed data protection into the life cycle of change. We're not looking at year 2000. We're looking at developing a robust mechanism to undertake data protection in every facet of our business operation. It is not just the technology staff. It is not just the IT. It's not just the CISO's problem. It goes across the full gambit. It goes across our corporate governance, our top-level policies, standards, guidance, how we engender, how we drive down, not only through our own organization, but into our supply chain, and how we bind them contractually. All our aspects of data governance, from classification through to encryption, through to retirement and disposal and erasure, retention. Our HR policies and procedures, whether it's staff vetting or whistleblowing procedures. Our education and awareness, not a once in a year 10-question tick box, but actually drive true awareness of data protection into our employees and ideally into our customers, building that understanding of responsibility. Understanding our third-party supply chain, our processes, our sub-processes, and making sure we have the correct mechanisms in place to drive our policies down into the supply chain, to drive our expectations, to make sure they are doing things to the standard we would expect and our data subjects would expect, and making that contractually binding. Understanding that physical security is just as important. We can't overlook those aspects. And of course, there is IT and information security. IT and information security plays such a major part in everything we do. Technology has developed at an astounding pace. We've already mentioned the transformations, the digital transformations, the move to the cloud, automation of processes, artificial intelligence, which we can argue over whether it exists or not, but how we use things to derive greater answers from the data we look at. Big data, the pooling of all of our data together and the interrogation therein. More than ever, we need to understand how our business processes affect that, how our business processes potentially cause weaknesses in the mechanisms we use to protect data. If we don't undertake that kind of assessment, we leave ourselves open to unknown risk. It isn't the cyber risk that is the true threat. It isn't the nation state. It is the weaknesses in our own business processes that really drives threats and vulnerabilities throughout the business. If we don't understand how they operate and how they interrelate to each other, we can never truly drive our data protection ethos forward throughout the organization. The difficulty is always that most of these things are the things we should have been doing for years, that we should have been measuring our effectiveness against for years. the risk management that we should have been doing for years. Now we have regulations and more of a spectre of what happens post-breach in terms of litigation, in terms of share price, in terms of customer confidence, in terms of customer loss, that says now is the time to start taking this seriously. To really understand that we can't buy the answer. We have to develop the answer through our own understanding of our own business, our understanding of how it operates. We may need help along the way. We may need particular expertise. We may need technology that supports us, but it's having the right technology and expertise to solve the right problems. There are many ways to look at data protection. We can look purely regulatory and make sure that we have all the different aspects that we need to have in place. We can look at records of processing activity and think that's probably good enough. But it's a long way from actually developing a data protection ecosystem and developing a sustainable approach to data protection that runs throughout our business. Again, it's risk identification, the correct prevention, measurement and reporting that only comes from an introspective look at ourselves. And that's how you build a sustainable approach to data protection. Now I'll hand back over to Eric, who will take us a little bit further through, and then we'll go into a Q&A session at the end where by all means ask any questions and we'll answer them as best as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Yes, just a quick reminder for those who came into the call a little bit later. If you have questions for myself or for Ed, do please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your dashboard, and we will try and answer them at the end of the session. So the question now is, how do we make this happen? How do we build that data protection DNA? When we talk to organizations throughout the EMEA region, there are many questions still open, and we ask some challenging questions. We ask people, do you have a comprehensive view of the data that you're using and manipulating and processing throughout your organization? Is the quality of that data sufficient, and is the data the information that you have up to date? How do you actually cope with constantly changing business demands and IT landscape? Can you reassess how you handle data across your enterprise quickly enough as your IT and business landscape evolves? Can you support collaboration between all of the various different stakeholders that have a stake in either optimizing value or minimizing risk or just running parts of the IT landscape? In many organizations, unfortunately, there is no comprehensive framework for risk management, and many individual risk aspects and compliance aspects are managed separately by different responsible people. And we also, over basically the entire region, we see that there is still insufficient systematic planning for introducing new technologies, and particularly taking into account data risks and data protection measures that should be incorporated in the introduction of new technologies into the operating model. So why does Software AG care? Let's go one step back and discuss a little bit about what Software AG actually does. In a nutshell, what we do is we help you to transform, optimize, and control the way that you run your business. And we do that in particular against a digital background, the background of digital business that is taking over our markets. So what we've defined, what we've created over the years is what we call the digital business platform, a single comprehensive platform to help you drive your digital business models. And it connects not just your internal systems and your internal processes, it connects also to the outside world, which is the core of digital business. It connects to your customers, to your partners, to the devices that they use and the devices that you use to provide services and to provide products into the market. At the heart of every successful digital business model is an optimized operating model, which has many moving and interacting parts, and it's constantly evolving. It is not changed only through projects, but through continuous drift. And so it's something that you need to understand. If you want to optimize or transform or control your operating model, the way that you run your business, you have to understand it first. And you have to understand it always. So what we provide as a set of capabilities from the digital business platform to design and govern digital operating models to support digital business models is a plethora of different capabilities that are all top of the market. We provide capabilities to design, to plan, and to govern the way that you run your business. And importantly, we help you to get visibility of all of the various different dependencies across all of these aspects. So, what does this mean for GDPR? How do we approach GDPR? SoftwareAG's GDPR solution basically consists of two main elements: the capability to provide insight, to analyze, and to plan measures to protect data better. And the other one is to ensure that your measures are effective and that you can provide the evidence to support that. It's all about getting the transparency across your processes, your data, your IT, documenting those, and providing the visibility across the entire spectrum and the understanding of how your operating model is constructed and how it is changing. The second part is about action. It is about control. It is about making sure that whenever a weakness is found or whenever a change mandates a new, fresh look at how data is protected, that you're able to do the assessments, provide the evidence, and analyze whether the value weighs up against the risk of using data in your organization. This is supported further by a very comprehensive package from DP governance, a set of analysis tools that will help you to get a 360-degree view of the current data protection as is situation that you have, and provides measures, provides recommendations on how to improve further on your data protection. So this together helps organizations to plan and execute on their digital strategy faster, with less risk, and more accurately. Obviously, for those of you who are familiar with our products, it looks amazing, and it should, because many different stakeholders are involved in data protection, in data governance, in complying with regulations, but also weighing value against risk in the innovation and evolution of digital services. And stakeholders from all functions in the organization can collaborate together on SoftwareAG's GDPR solution to design new processes, to design new systems, to plan their realization and rollout, to assess the risk profiles of all of the various different changes, and to take effective measures. What is core to this is to have a structured analysis method, which allows you to not just assess the security and compliance in all areas, but then zoom in to the high-risk processes within each area and create a comprehensive report on how to remediate any gaps found. The GDPR solution obviously is fairly new. Many organizations only started thinking about GDPR in earnestness a year ago. Some organizations actually only started their compliance project in the last few months. The only thing that they can achieve in those few months is to do a first once-off compliance assessment. Do we comply with all of the regulations? Which is fine. But now organizations need to think about how do we make this sustainable? How do we make sure that we are continually doing the best we can to protect our customers' data, and with that, to retain our customers' trust and to keep their business. Nevertheless, numerous organizations have already come on board and have started to use Software GDPR solution. And this is what they've been saying to us. Rather than seeing GDPR as a burden, we now consider this new regulation as an opportunity for assessing our current situation. Or we establish more strategic goals in our organization because we're now less risk-averse about projects. And we can now deliver world-class data protection capabilities, and this has proven to be a huge competitive edge for us. And this is something that we hear back a lot. Everyone is jumping on the digital bandwagon, which provides enormous opportunities to extend into new services, and it drives a lot of innovation in the market. But it comes with risk, and the risk could be devastating if it occurs. Companies that are superior in gaining the customer's trust and retaining the customer's trust will have a competitive edge. Data protection governance in that sense is not a compliance effort. It's not a tick in the box. It is actually essential for a digital business model. It is strategic, in fact. And with that, I would like to remind you once more that you can ask questions in the Q&A section, and I would like to invite you to ask your questions right now. So we have already some questions in the Q&A. The first question is from Daniel Tang. Thank you for your question. Daniel says, will Software G be running follow-up sessions on different ways to embed GDPR into the use of their products, security, access, permissions, etc.? Yes, we definitely will. We have had several GDPR webinars that go more deeply into the technology behind our GDPR solution. It shows how we actually support GDPR initiatives and help to drive data protection into the DNA of all of the design and planning processes of organizations. I don't have a schedule of webinars on me right now, but these are or will be planned in the next couple of months. Let me check if the next question is here. Yeah, I have a question from Bert Kirking. Thank you for your question. The question is, hi, and thank you for a great webinar. Thank you. I'm very happy to hear DP is about people, processes, procedures, and not an IT thing. What can I implement to analyze risks on PD regarding access, storing, changing, deleting, and transfer? Can AI robotics help? Ed, can AI robotics help?
So to start off, there's an argument to say whether artificial intelligence really exists. So when we talk about artificial intelligence in its truest form, realistically, we're talking about kind of machine learning algorithms which start with kind of that pattern matching and working up to hypotheses, or you're talking expert systems that start with a hypothesis and then work down through inference to determine whether that hypothesis proves true or doesn't prove true. Would I go straight for technology? No, probably not, to be honest. I'd want to understand, it depends kind of what you've already got in place. So we're obviously talking, I presume the PD is DP. When you're talking about analysing the risks with regards to access, storing, changing, deleting, transfer, whether that's all within the technology stack, because obviously there are business processes and access controls and human beings and systems and services that all have access to that data through different mechanisms. I would truly understand what the problem is first before I jump into a technology. There may be some kind of robotics engine, absolutely, that can help you, but it depends on what that problem is. Obviously, this is quite a high-level question in one sense, and you might have that detail. I'd want to get down into the weeds of what the problem is I'm trying to solve rather than go technology first. Too often in many things we look to a technology answer without truly scoping the problem.
So I look forward to engaging with you outside of the webinar. I think we should explore this question in a little bit more detail, Bert. Actually, I'm familiar with an insurance company that is putting robotics in place at places where data has to be transferred from one system into another system, and where this used to be a human activity, it's now a robotic activity. But in this specific case, taking a risk out of the equation because it was the human factor that was actually exposed to a lot of data that had very, very little value, but it did pose a risk. So in that specific case, robotics was used to mitigate the GDPR risk. But as Ed said, it really depends on the situation. We would love to discuss this in more detail with you.
And absolutely, that's one where you have a distinct problem of a human transfer effectively in place, where you can use automation and robotic automation to remove that issue and remove that risk of error. And that's absolutely a use case, 100%, and that's one where you can kind of demonstrate an improvement. You're removing the risk of error from there. I've just seen another question come in, Eric, which is from Nick Alex. Which says, has the information security community been selling for decades the fallacy that more technology will prevent a data breach? Are we saying it's actually a business process problem? It's going to be a very unpopular answer, sadly, but yes, the information security community is generally, it's predicated, their business model is about selling the latest technology, selling the latest development, selling the latest next generation firewall or the next generation IPS system or IDS system or SIEM tool or artificial intelligence, which is now the big thing in the information security market as well. And it's absolutely predicated, that's their market, that's the vendor market, and that's the area they play in. My one main thing is that if you understand your business processes, because it's your business processes that actually determine how effective any of these things are, that will determine how your architectural governance is in place, how your change management is in place, how your supplier contracts are in place, how your supplier mechanisms, how they interact is in place, how your physical security is in place, your access control, all of these are business processes. If you get down into the weeds of those and understand where your true risks are, that's when you can look for potentially technology answers to solve it. I would never start with technology as the answer. And I would never believe the hype of a vendor, to be honest, in that sense of there is a threat and therefore you must buy our product.
Exactly. So we have time for one more question. Let me see in the Q&A. Hi, this is a question from Vijay Jasti. Thank you for your question. The question is, hi, can you clarify whether GDPR is in compliance, in control, or not in a situation of webMethods admin having access as usual to backend and monitor and logs, and there are some customer or user employee related integrations are exist in webMethods. So basically, you're saying so sometimes admins actually have direct access to customer data from the back end of the system, and is this would this actually violate anything particular in GDPR? My take on this is, as such, no, unless proper procedures are in place. But I'm absolutely convinced that Ed has a very good answer to this question.
Thank you, Eric. So just the fact that, you know, the way we interact through the web and through our integration technologies means that there is bound to be some customer data in there. Even as I move to back-end systems, if it captures things like my true client IP, that's classed as personal data. It might class logon data or information that gets passed through to back-end systems. And administrators, by their very nature, have to administer some of those, and they may be able to see data in transit, which may or may not be encrypted. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. So long as you're aware, for a start, that that data is there and that data is potentially accessible, and understand the potential risks towards it and put the right mitigating actions in place, whether that is monitoring, whether that's access controls, whether that's pseudonymization, whatever it happens to be, then it doesn't mean you're not in compliance. It's just about understanding. So what does that actually mean in terms of potential access to the data and potential risk there to the data and therefore the rights and freedoms of the individuals? There are many people who will have access to data, not just admins. There are many across your entire organization. Each one of those represents a risk in its own right, and it's about, if you understand and get down into the nuts and bolts as to, so what is that risk and how may it manifest itself, and what mitigations or effective controls do we need to have in place to minimize that risk where possible. Bearing in mind that data is accessible, data is transferred, therefore it's put at risk, to build that down and build a picture of what that looks like. It's not compliant or non-compliant in any way. It's about understanding kind of what it looks like and get it into.
Okay, I think with that our time is done. Our time is over. I want to thank you all so much for attending our webinar, and I hope to engage with you further in the next couple of weeks or months. Please reach out to us, and we'll talk. Thank you so much for your attention. Our program will end now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.